Hello and welcome to DEJI360. I am DEJI Badimasi, and today on the program we're looking at the national conference that has just ended. What we're trying to do on this program is to review that conference, take a look at some of the key recommendations of the conference. As you know, the conference has ended and President Goodluck Jonathan was at the national conference, venue of the national conference now, to formally receive the report of that conference and declare it closed. Well, let's take a listen to what President Goodluck Jonathan said when he went to that conference venue now to receive the report of the conference.
It is now very clear that as Nigerians, we have devised a way of addressing and resolving our differences amicably. We dialogue and dialogue until we agree. This is most heartwarming indeed. And the results of the conference have shown that we are not enemies, neither are we antagonists. No matter our religion, regions, states, and tongue, this conference has reinforced what I have always believed, that Nigeria is here for our collective good. You have done your patriotic duty. We, the elected people, must now do our own. As I received the reports of your painstaking deliberations, let me assure that your work is not going to be a waste of time and resources. We shall do all we can to ensure the implementation of your recommendations, which have come out of consensus and not by divisions. We are quite pleased that no voting, and that is the key thing. So if 492 eggheads, respected leaders from this country have come up with these documents, these reports, definitely those of us in the executive arm of government and the parliamentarians will respect these reports.
President Goodluck Jonathan receiving the report of the national conference there. Now, let me just say this, that the President also made it clear that the report of that conference will be given to the National Assembly to incorporate and incorporate into its ongoing amendment of the Constitution. As you know, in the National Assembly, there's a process, an amendment process of the Constitution going on. So this report will be given to the National Assembly. That's what the President said, to look at it and look at the recommendations and just incorporate it into the Constitution. So in this case, nothing like well, a referendum and what have you. But now let's take a look at some of the key recommendations now of this conference that has just ended. The first, of course, is the creation of 18 states. The conference actually recommended the creation of 18 states. One for it says there should be 3 per geopolitical zones, but pending that creation of 18 states, it says 1 state should be created for the Southeast for now, so that there's some kind of balance, because the other geopolitical zones have 6 states each, but the Southeast has just 5, of course, with the exception of the Northwest, which actually has 7 states. And it also suggested the merger of states. And in terms of resource control, the conference did not come up with any position at all. It says a technical committee has to be set up. That technical committee now would have to advise the government on what to do in terms of resource control. Now, the next one is public finance and revenue allocation. Well, this is what the conference is proposing. It says the federal government should now get 42.5%, state governments 35%, and local government should get 22.5%. Of course, an increment for state governments there. And the next one says, well, that is forms of government. It's talking about a modified presidential system that it says is homemade, where the president will have to pick his vice president from the National Assembly, that's from the legislature, and that some of his ministers too should come from the legislature, and that this minister should not be more than 18. And then on religion, it says no government sponsorship of Christian or Muslim pilgrimages to the Holy Land, as is the practice now, and that churches and mosques should begin to pay tax to the government. Well, that's a very controversial one, and of course has generated a lot of reaction. I'm now being joined on the program by Achike Chudo, political affairs analyst, to dissect and review some of these recommendations. Achike, thank you very much for coming on the program. Very quickly, because we do not have all the time in the world. Very quickly, let's start from what the president said. A lot of people who attended that conference as delegates had actually suggested that there should be a referendum at the end of the day, and that the outcome of that the national conference should be considered as a draft constitution. We saw the confusion that generated before the leadership of the conference now said, okay, they are just draft recommendations. Going to the National Assembly, you think it's a good idea that we're not going to have a referendum?
Well, I didn't really see how a referendum was going to be possible. Who was going to make that possible? The president. It also had to, it needed the approval of the National Assembly, even for that too. So from the very beginning, the issue of referendum was never really, you know, something that was concrete. It was always there. It was always there in the air. People were pushing for it and so on, but like I said again, it needed the approval or the stamp of authority of the National Assembly, and it was almost impossible that they were going to get that. So from the very beginning, for those people who were talking about a national referendum, I think it was more of a wishful thinking than the practicality or the reality that was on ground. So that is where I see that, even though the president had held out hope somehow in his opening address to you know, the national conference, yeah, had talked about the possibility of a referendum and so on, but it was always going to be a tall order. So I am not surprised that they didn't really you know, come up with that. But you see, the reality is that I think that you know, too many people were just eager to get the national conference started. That the final output of the conference, you know, and the ability to translate that output into, you know, something that could be practicalized was lost on everybody. And I think that takes me back a little bit to the invasion of Iraq. You know, people kept on saying that, look, the government did not have an exit strategy. They insisted that they did, but the unfolding event showed us that there was really no exit strategy. So they had not also factored the fact that you know, some other things needed to be done before you could call this you know, conference.
For you, did you see any groundbreaking or any something quite special recommendations in all the recommendations?
No, I wouldn't really say so. I mean, if you talk about the issue of you know, local governments, for instance, it has always been clear that the political elites in this country for many years now, even during the military administration, have always been very, you know, averse to the issue of local governments in Nigeria. Most of them respected that in breach. Most of the governors, especially from 1999 till date, never had any respect. But instead, we are very disdainful and contemptful of local, you know, governments, and that is why you say
basically that, nothing new.
Yeah, that's why I say that the issue of funding going to local government was continued to remain the exclusive preserve of governors who decided what to do with them on and what not to do.
I have to ask you this question. What do you make of that recommendation of mixed presidential parliamentary system? You think it's something that is
where people
the president picks his vice president from?
Yeah, where people have always talked about our presidential system being extremely very expensive and so on. So you would think that perhaps this is the reason why they are doing that, but they are not doing that for that. I mean, it doesn't cost anything to be a vice president in this country, because the vice president runs on the ticket of the president. So it is the money that is allocated, you know, for once the vice president is chosen, he hangs on the presidency, on the presidential candidate and so on. So there's
and the question that was not answered, you know, who exactly in the National Assembly would the president have to choose? Does it mean the president will just choose any lawmaker?
Well, for as long as that is a recommendation, if it is passed into law, for instance, and it did not specify anybody, it means that the president can pick anybody, just about anybody that he
we see that even as we speak today, the president can actually, if the president was running for the presidency, the president can actually pick even a lawmaker to be his running it.
Yeah, that has always happened. So again, like I said, there is nothing really groundbreaking in terms of do they want to save money and so on. And so it is difficult to understand the rationale, behind that, because this is not something that is fundamental, to the running of government in this country. It is a very, very cosmetic
and then picking some ministers from the National Assembly as well.
Yeah, also does not, really make sense to me, because if you're saying, okay, 18, ministers and so on, maybe from the National Assembly, the outside National Assembly, 30% of the ministers and so on. So ultimately, at the end of the day, how many people are we going to have? You're going to have, I thought at the initial stage that perhaps this was about reflecting the economic realities of the country, so that the ministers, a lot of these parastatals and ministries will be merged together, and then you have, less ministries and so on. But if you're talking about 18% from the National Assembly, and then, the rest, about 30% or so from outside, it means you're also going to have the same number of, perhaps the same number of ministers we have had.
No, of course, they basically said not more than 18 ministers in total.
Well, if they said not more than 18 ministers, that would be wonderful, but I did not get that sense that this is exactly what they were talking about. There is the issue of the number that was talked about, then there was the a percentage, about 30%.
Yeah, of course, that of these 18 ministers, not more than 30% should come from outside.
Okay, fine. So that's wonderful. If it was stated clearly like that, then I think that makes sense. That reflects the social economic realities of this country.
Very quickly now, this aspect of part-time law legislature, you think it's what's your take on that?
No, well, a lot of,
I mean, it's something we've been talking about anyway, so nothing new there.
Yeah, no, nothing new. I think it's a wonderful. Of course, it has its drawbacks, it has its advantages and disadvantages. The tendency for it to make legislatures very, very unserious. They want to pursue their business, and so especially if they are not getting what they feel should be the right amount of compensation. I think that is dependent again on the individual commitment of the individuals that are going to be involved.
But let's not also forget that the lawmakers in this country do not sit for the whole 300.
No, I also wanted to go there, that this is just an argument, but when you juxtapose it, against the fact that you have a lot of lawmakers that are being paid stupendiously, and yet they do not spend enough time in the parliament, then you realize that you could make this argument for either sides. Yeah.
Okay, very, very quickly, because we have to round up. I have to ask you this. This is certainly very controversial. Payment of taxes by churches and mosques.
It is controversial. It is controversial. There could be a lot of sense in that. If you look at the way some of these religious people, have been going about their businesses and so on. Of course, people, when religious leaders begin to purchase private jets and so on, then you begin to ask questions. Where are these monies coming from? The monies are being, contributed by their converts who have been living in penury for so many years. So there's the issue of the belief that the churches or religious leaders are exploiting their flock. And then if they have money for this kind of luxury, that's why a lot of people look at it, then perhaps they should have money to contribute to national development. But apart from that, there are also churches. When we make this kind of example, there are also churches, especially the traditional churches, the Orthodox churches, that have given so much back to society. They have hundreds of schools that they have
so
built.
It just might not be fair to say all churches and mosques.
Once you rope them, you blanket them and so on. Even some of the Islamic organizations too have also been involved in a lot of social developmental programs and so on consistently. And do not forget that in other places where some of these organizations are actually regulated and so on, you realize that instead of talking about taxes and so on, that the government is the federal government funds their schools and some of these hospitals that they have, because they are also contributing to national development. Yeah.
That's quite true. Now, how do you think? Do you think the National Assembly will be able to consider all of these recommendations before the next election? Election is just around the corner.
DEJI, I think we're in a very tight corner. The reality is that this recommendation will depend on the disposition, the benevolence and magnanimity of the National Assembly. Nobody has the power to compel the National Assembly to move in a particular direction. And so you now find a situation where those who were at the National Conference are hard put to look at, in terms of considering the very next move, because they realize, and their integrity also depends on what the National Assembly does with these recommendations. If at the end of the day, what happens with this recommendation or this resolution is what we saw with the Oputa panel and some of the other things we've had in this country. That you can describe this, 10 billion spent for this national conference as a complete waste, and then that would also impugn somehow on the character and integrity of the very people, because do not forget that there were those who had serious doubts with regards to whatever it is you are going to come up with. Are they in a position to translate it to practicality? If you look at the fact that from 1999 to date, even though we have had a PDP government at the center, they have never really been able to pass budgets, national budgets, which are instruments of law. They've never really been able to pass them as and when due. They've always struggled.
That's quite true.
And so if they are not able to do that to a very important instrument,
and they are all getting ready now for elections.
They are now getting, then you are talking about passing the national and passing, this incorporating it into the Constitutional Conference, even with the initial reservation they had. And again, like you said, especially now that some of them now have to think much about how they are going to get back into office and so on, then one, to a very large extent, can hazard a guess that it is going to be an exercise in futility. But we would want to be proved wrong, that they can actually, do something with this.
All right, Achike, thank you very much for coming on the program, and thank you very much for your thoughts. Okay, we'll take a short break now. When we come back, we'll be speaking to a former member of the National Assembly. Every day, every hour, and every minute, news break in Nigeria. Things happen so fast, it's most times difficult to track and comprehend them. But that's what we do right here on DEJI360. 2015, would you want to come back again?
It's like asking Jesus Christ if he knew he was going to die, will you want to come back as the savior of the world again?
We do not just help you track the stories, we break them down, explore all the angles, analyze the issues so that you can fully comprehend the stories and use them to make the right decisions. Welcome back, and if you've just joined us, you're watching DEJI360. I'm now being joined on the program to review the recommendations now of the National Conference, and now being joined by Senator Olorunimbe Mamora, who is a former Senate Deputy Minority Leader. Distinguished Senator, thank you very much for joining us on the program. But let me just start by asking you, how do you think this report of the National Conference is going to fare in the National Assembly?
Well, the first thing to say is to congratulate the National Conference for at least coming up with some far-reaching recommendations with a view to strengthening our federalism. But having said that, I would like to feel that the National Assembly probably deliberately slow down the process of the completion of the constitutional amendment in order to be in a better position to accommodate maybe some of the decisions of the confab. Now, and I think what the Mr. President has done is probably the best in the circumstance, because the Constitution as we have it now, 1999 Constitution as amended, only makes provisions for amendment.
And not a wholesale constitution.
And yes, and not a new constitution. There's no provision for making a new constitution. And besides, if a new constitution were to be put in place, then we would have required a constituent assembly, which can only be set up by an enabling act, which is lacking in this circumstance. So ordinarily there ought to have been an enabling act setting up the constituent assembly, defining the process and of course incorporating the referendum and all, what have you. But since we don't have that in place, I think what Mr. President is trying to do for now is the best. That is, sending the recommendations or the reports to the National Assembly for possible incorporation, into the Constitution. And don't forget, what that entails is that the National Assembly will have to look at the recommendations and determine which of the recommendations are in tandem with their own thinking as well. Before, yes, they have to determine if it's in tandem with their own thinking, and then now pass him and forward it to the State Houses of Assembly for concurrence by 2/3 of the State Houses of Assembly.
Now, with elections coming up early next year, and of course, we understand that various political parties, of course, will be conducting their primaries in October, and not minding consider the fact that members of the National Assembly are also politicians, and we know politicians are busy at this time. Do you think members of the National Assembly will have the time to really sit down and look at these recommendations and work on them?
Seriously, I doubt very much, and this was one of the reservations that some of us had when we did not support the confab because of the timing and because of what we are facing now as to how best will the report and recommendations be handled. Some people are talking about referendum. How do you do referendum when there's not an enabling law for same? Mr. President's pronouncement cannot and will not amount to law itself. So that was one of the reservations that some of us had then, and then I can see that playing out because right now the political space is getting so choked up, in terms of jostling for nominations and then subsequent electioneering campaign and then snowballing into elections in next year.
Now, we know every bill has a lifespan in the National Assembly, and when a bill is not passed, you just can't carry over a bill. It means the process will have to start all over again. That's the practice in the National Assembly. Now, if the National Assembly is not able to complete this and it decides to carry this to the next assembly, it definitely means it's going to start this process all over again, isn't it?
Yes, it's possible because don't forget that you may have, not necessarily the next assembly. Members may not entirely be, all of them may not be entirely new, but definitely the new ones will want to be briefed properly. They want to have proper understanding of what they're going to deal with, and of course, it's a process. It's like the old things have passed away and new things, they have come on board. So we'll have to start the new. That is, if Mr. President sends it to the National Assembly and that bill, in respect of this, the report of the National Conference, if the President of the National Assembly is unable to take it through, then it may be represented in the next assembly. Well, again, depending on who and who, because the actors on the scene there may be different, from what we have right now.
What do you make of that recommendation suggesting a part-time legislature?
I don't think it's going to work. I don't think it's going to work because you see the job of the legislature it has become more sophisticated than what it used to be. And if you want thoroughness and you want commitment of the members of the legislature, I think it's only desirable for them to be on full-time engagement as opposed to part-time.
Let me quickly ask you this now. The other recommendation, an aspect of, one of the recommendations actually suggesting that the president should pick his vice president from the National Assembly and pick some of his ministers from the National Assembly as well. What's your take on that?
Well, that would be a kind of admixture, if you like, of parliamentary and presidential system. So it's a kind of hybrid of presidential and the parliamentary system. Well, you see, as far as I'm concerned, the problem is not much of which system you choose. The problem has to do with the actors within the political space. And irrespective of what we decide to do, I think what is important is the commitment. It is the sincerity. It is the seriousness. It is the ability of the actors in the political space to uphold fairness, justice, equity, and of course within the framework of the provisions of the Constitution. I think this is what is important. It is not with the system you adopt that matters, but the commitment, the sincerity with which you approach the job at hand. I think that's the most important thing.
Well, thank you.
I'm not, it doesn't matter to me what system is adopted.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Olorunniyi Mamora, for joining us on the program. That was Senator Olorunniyi Mamora, the former Deputy Minority Leader of the Senate. It's on that note we end the program. We thank you very much for watching. Now, if you want to watch the program again, simple. Just go to our website, tv360nigeria.com. You'll find the program and lots more there. You can also watch us on YouTube. The YouTube address now is... okay, I'm still waiting for the YouTube address. There it is, YouTube that's youtube.com/TV360 Nigeria. And you can also follow us Google Plus TV360 Nigeria, and on Facebook our address is facebook.com/TV360 online, and of course our Twitter handle is at TV360 online. And that's it. But thank you very much for watching. I am DEJI360. I'll see you again next week.